When it comes to electric vehicles or EVs, China is the crownless king. There's nothing new about that. But what was news to us was when Bhavish Aggarwal, the CEO of Ola Electric, recently announced at an event that his company is the world's largest electric two-wheeler manufacturer and the fourth largest EV company in the world.
It left everyone scratching their heads for a few seconds. That was until they noticed the fine print at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide. Marked with an asterisk in tiny lettering, it said, excluding China. So we asked Nathan Narde, our reporter who covers EVs in India.
Okay, so Nathan, Ola Electric is apparently the fourth largest EV company in the world. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, that caught everyone's attention, right? And I guess if you torture data long enough, it'll confess to anything you want to. Like,
That is true. It's like, Mukesh Ambani saying that he's the richest man in the world, excluding all the billionaires outside of Asia. Or DuckDuckGo saying that they are the largest search engine, excluding Google and Microsoft Bing. It does not make any sense whatsoever. So, it was not a shocker when the meme army of the internet descended upon Ola Electric and Bhavish Aggarwal.
Even if you look at the electric two-wheeler, which is Ola Electric's hero product, the world's top 5 in electric two-wheeler companies are all Chinese. If you look at four-wheelers, China is dominant there too. More than half of the four-wheelers sold in China are EVs. So forget Ola, India itself is nowhere close to China when it comes to EVs.
In fact, we actually included China and fixed that chart for Mr. Bhavish Aggarwal. You will find it in the show notes of this episode. And guess where Ola Electric stands in the list of top publicly traded EV companies by revenue? It's not even in the top 10. It's at number 11. So to say that Mr. Aggarwal's statement was a tall claim would be an understatement.
Which is why this is a good time to talk about how China got to where it is now with EVs and to see where India stands in comparison. To begin with, as of now, China is making a new generation of more technologically advanced electric vehicles. We're talking the next level of batteries, design, AI integration, self-driving. The thing is, having had a head start, thanks to the Chinese government's concerted efforts to push EVs, the entire value chain of the EV industry in China is just more evolved.
So, in this episode, we try to understand why China just cannot be in fine print when anybody anywhere around the world is talking about EVs. Hello and welcome to another special episode of Daybreak. I'm Snigdha.
And I'm Rahil, and every week we come together to talk about something in business and tech that interests the both of us.
And it won't just be us. Depending on what we're talking about, we will bring in a bunch of really interesting people onto the podcast.
In this episode, we speak to two people from the Ken's newsroom who have covered the EV space extensively, Nathan Narde and Lu Zhao, who's been reporting on EVs in China for the Ken.
Nathan, can you begin by telling us what the EV landscape in India looks like right now? How successful has EV adoption been? And who are the biggest players?
so when it comes to like vehicle form factors, with like take two-wheelers and three-wheelers are actually the hero story in India in terms of like EV penetration, because they've reached like 54% right now, and that's like 1 in 2 uh, uh, s- electric vehicles that are sold in India in three-wheelers are electric. Compare it to like take scooters or two-wheelers where there are only like 8 or 9% of like EV penetration. Ola Electric, which is the leader of that pack, although their market share has been declining. It used to have like 49% market share, I think, 2 years ago, and now it's at like 33%. So the EV space for two-wheelers is split between Ola Electric, followed by TVS at around 70%, screen, Bajaj almost around the same in terms of market share, and then you have the likes of Ather and very small other indigenous players. Now, switching gears and speaking about like four-wheelers, right? The EV penetration is very low. It's like maybe 3 or 4%. And the only company leading this charge is Tata Motors because they have a very clear EV only strategy. Now, what I mean by that is it's not that they don't sell ICE cars, it's that when it comes to alternative fuels, it's only EV. So, in terms of four wheelers, I think Tata has around 60 to 65% of market share, followed by, I think, Morris Garage.
Right.
And then you have like Chotu Motu players in India again. So right now you have companies like say a Maruti, which is the largest company of like automobile makers in India, but they are following more of a hybrid strategy right now, and they're delaying their EV launches as we speak. That's kind of what the EV landscape in India looks like today.
Um, we know that lately EV sales in China have been dropping off, and one of the ways that companies are dealing with it is like they're pushing to expand outside of China. Can you give us a sense of where the EV market in China is at right now? Has it really become slow, or because compared to the rest of the world, China still seems pretty ahead, right?
Right. Well, definitely compared to when it started, maybe around 2009. Now it's like slowing down a little bit, but I would say compared to the rest of the world, it's probably still like going very strong because it's still a big country. There's still so many consumers. But from the very beginning, China has been pushing really hard to achieve its goal, right? To become greener, to have a better image in the world stage. And I guess the subsidies, it was really important for many consumers. It was cheaper to buy an EV. So a lot of consumers just went into it. But at the end of 2022, the government stopped subsidies to individuals, which means they couldn't, get the same cheap price when they were considering to buy an EV. That impacted the consumption options for many people. So I guess that's why we see the EV consumption slowing down a lot since that.
Since 2009, China has been leagues ahead of the rest of the world when it comes to EVs. And a big reason for that is because of what Lou just mentioned: subsidies. China subsidized electric mobility like nobody's business. EV research and developing tech in the space was in all of the government's 5-year plans. And all of that hard work eventually paid off. Multiple studies and surveys have found that China's EV market is now the biggest in the world. The country is home to more than 160 EV companies, many of which have crashed and burned because of the sheer level of competition. But this period also put a lot of Chinese EV manufacturers on the map. Companies like BYD, NIO, Xiaomi became some of the biggest names in the EV space in the world.
But then in 2022, the Chinese government reined in the subsidies. They believed that the EV space had gotten to a point where it could manage on its own. But once the training wheels were off, sales started slowing down. Or at least that's what all the analysts and journalists had to say. Nathan says it isn't that simple.
Right. I just wanted to ask about like whenever we talk about EV sales slowing down, are we talking about like absolute numbers or like the rate of growth of sales? Because I feel like in India also like we're getting the conversation kind of wrong. Like EVs in absolute numbers aren't declining. It's the rate of growth of the sales which is falling down. And we're seeing this across like the vehicle form factors, be it two-wheelers or four-wheelers. So is something similar playing out in China as well, where the rate of growth of sales is like slowing down, but like the absolute number of like units sold is still increasing over time?
Right. Just to kind of put that in perspective, like, between 2021 and 2022, EV sales in China grew from 1.3 million to 6.8 million, right?
Right.
Which is massive. So, yeah, what then do we mean?
By sales, that's why I feel like a lot of these headlines tend to be on the alarmist side of things and don't really reflect the ground reality, because we have to also acknowledge the base factor, right? The base will keep on, the denominator will keep on increasing over time, and the rate of growth won't be the same.
Right.
So, like, whenever people talk about sales slowing down, it really doesn't hit the right note as we expect it to. It's the rate of growth in the sales which is slowing down.
Right. So it's basically pretty natural for that to happen, right? As more and more people buy EVs. But Nathan, China didn't become this, EV powerhouse overnight, right? There's like a decade of work that's actually gone into it that actually led to this massive EV boom that we're seeing. Does India actually stand to gain anything from China's success?
So that answer can be answered in two words. It's complicated, right? Because on one hand, I think going back last year, BYD had this proposal of setting up a manufacturing plant in India as a joint venture with Megha Engineering. And it was a $1 billion proposal. The government was like, no, thank you. We don't really need your help right now. Cut to this year, where Jindal Group signed a joint venture and acquired majority stake, like 51%, with a Chinese-based EV maker known as the SAIC Motor Company, which is commonly referred to as Morris Garage. So on one hand, yeah, you have the government showing the door to BYD. On the other hand, you're also seeing these partnerships take fruit. But what is complicated in the sense is that we definitely do have something to gain from the Chinese dominance in this EV ecosystem, be it in terms of knowledge share at least. So the way we see it is that instead of looking at China as a BYD and like the Chinese ecosystem as a TikTok, which is like a huge threat, we should look at it as a Maruti in search for a Suzuki. Like, without which we'll still be driving Premier Padmanis today, right? So that I think that kind of perception shift needs to be there in like the EV ecosystem too.
On that note, Nathan, China has many, many years on us as far as EVs are concerned. But even in India, it is quite an exciting time for EVs, right? We've seen the government pushing it, like with subsidies, fame. Of course, terms and conditions apply, but we have seen all these new EVs enter the market. So I'm curious to know how different India's EV journey has been so far.
Today, like, except the three-wheeler space in India, the EV penetration, which is basically a formula of like how many EVs are sold corresponding to the absolute number of vehicles sold. So there was a really good report in the rest of world which highlighted the three-wheeler figures. It stands at 54% today compared to like the two-wheeler space and the four-wheeler space, which is still in like 5% and 2% respectively. And the reason like you see like the three-wheelers championing the cause of EVs in India is because it makes economic sense to like the riders. They're not appealing to like their environmental consciousness. When I was speaking to like an investor in this company called Battery Smart, which basically makes battery swapping solutions for electric three-wheelers, he spoke about this concept called the green discount kicking in. He's like, for the rider, it's like lower downtime, and like lower downtime and changing the battery means increased earnings.
Correct.
Compared to like charging, where he would spend more time charging the vehicle compared to like working that vehicle so he could make more earnings. That's what we see kicking in India today, especially in the three-wheeler space. And primarily, like if we like switch gears and speak about the four-wheelers, today there was a report in Economic Times that spoke about strong hybrids overtaking EV sales in the first quarter of this financial year. I think it was around 23,000 units compared to like EVs being 20,000. So again, it's the same thing. There are charging concerns which are like holding consumers back. Added to that, there's also this idea of range anxiety. But what's curious about India is that there are few states, I think right now, Uttar Pradesh being one, they're offering a discount on like buying a strong hybrid. Barring few states in India like Uttar Pradesh, we don't have like a hybrid car policy in
What do
India.
you mean by when you say a strong hybrid?
A strong hybrid is basically, if we think about it, like a hybrid is like a marriage between like a motor and like a battery. A
Yes.
strong hybrid is where the battery is moving the wheels more than the
Got it.
motor. Just like an
Understood.
oversimplification,
Understood,
but
yeah.
that's basically what it comes down to. So like if we see all of the Toyota Innovas on the road and we see an identical Maruti car, that's usually the companies which are driving this forward.
Right.
So that's what we're seeing in India today. Like the strong hybrids are overtaking like the EVs too. So I guess our electrification journey is being slightly more delayed compared to like other countries. And if we think about it in like a larger context, we don't have a cutoff date for like ICE vehicles.
Like Nathan was speaking about hybrids, right? In India, we've really taken on to hybrids like compared to EVs, right?
Right.
Like, what is the situation with hybrids in China?
I actually wanted to clarify a little bit because in China, we actually use the phrase 新能源, which means new energy vehicles. And that's like an umbrella term that includes EVs, hybrids. But basically, it's a bigger term. But when people talk about things like the market, how much they're selling, they're just using new energy as a general term together. And that's sort of equivalent to EV. That's just how conversation goes. We don't really like diversifies or specifies.
That's interesting. So when we talk about EV adoption in China, that also includes hybrids.
Hybrid.
Right.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Right.
But I think a point of like comparison over here is that when we talk about hybrids in countries other than in India, we're referring to strong hybrids. In India, we have the case of like mild hybrids.
Yeah.
Like if we look at the lower variants of
Like
like
the Maruti.
yeah, the Maruti cars, like a Grand Vitara, the entry level cars, they're mild hybrids where the motor is moving more of the wheels compared to like the battery.
Yeah.
I think when we speak about hybrids in like a global context, they tend to refer to like strong hybrids compared to like that's just like one point to like clarify over there.
Got it.
And also
But
the
like-
hybrids, it also depend on the individual city's policy. Like I know in Beijing, I don't think they're allowed to sell hybrids versus in Shanghai, it's more popular to get a hybrid because, you know, those companies, they also have their base city. And when they're in their base city, they've got, you know, more flexibility to do what they're selling and stuff. And also because China is big, just as India, right? We have like different seasons, temperatures, weathers in different cities. So in northern parts, people will be talking about how battery lives are not so reliable in the winters because it gets really cold. And maybe they can only live up to like 50% and they have to charge very often. But in northern part of China, for example, Beijing again, the daily commute will be quite long, maybe like longer than 40 minutes, maybe an hour. And it's difficult for them to just keep it up on a daily commute. Versus in Shanghai, the weather will be milder and well, also depending on where you live, right? But the charging situation might be slightly better.
It's kind of like in India, you're far more likely to see a lot of EVs on the roads in a city like Bangalore that's super, I mean, EV friendly as opposed to
infrastructures all
the
present.
infrastructure exists.
Exactly.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Point of view.
Right. I feel like that's another notion which is being flipped on its head in India today, like as we speak. Because if we usually think of EVs to be this very modern, urban, elite product, but right now we're seeing a rate of growth in tier 2 cities compared to like the tier 1 cities, the likes of a Bangalore or like a Bombay, where we expect fast charging facilities to take place. Just to give you an example, like I was speaking to someone from Ather sometime like a few weeks back, and they launched a new scooter called the Ritsta. They were doing like 100 units of sales in like a state like Gujarat, which only has all of their cities qualify as tier 2 cities. But right now they're selling like 1,500 units. So like there's a 10x jump over there. So this is another trend we're seeing play out right now. Like they've played out most of the market in like the urban cities, and now they're seeing growth even in tier 2 cities in India as well.
Two-wheelers, three-wheelers in
Two-wheelers and
particular.
three-wheelers,
Yeah,
not four-wheelers.
Not four-wheelers.
Four-wheelers are struggling in tier 1 cities as it is. Right. I just wanted to understand like the auto landscape in China, right? Like, is it a two-wheeler market or like a three-wheeler market? Because when we speak about India, I think there was a National Family Health Survey which basically said that 1 in 2 households in India has a two-wheeler. So India is predominantly like a two-wheeler market if you view it from that lens. And I just wanted to understand, like, what kind of a auto market are we seeing in China? Like, what does the landscape look like?
It's interesting. When you talk about two-wheelers, are you talking about the motorbikes?
Motorbikes and scooters included. Like in
I
India, I
see.
feel like there are more, if we're talking about ICE vehicles, almost 68% are motorcycles when we speak about two-wheelers, the remaining being scooters, and they qualify as two-wheelers. But like we can like include both of these when we speak about two-wheelers.
Right. It's interesting because in different cities, again, it's a different landscape. For example, in my hometown, which is Anhui, not super far from Shanghai, it's also like in East China. Over there, you will see, those shared bikes, right? And in my
Right.
hometown, you will also see shared scooters.
Mhm.
However, you won't be seeing them in Shanghai. I'm not entirely sure why. I guess Shanghai, it's much bigger city. People might be, or the government is concerned about, the road safety and stuff like that. Maybe that's why they wouldn't be rolling out like shared scooters. But also, Shanghai is a very friendly city for riding scooters, so you can actually see a lot of scooters, just not shared ones, but individual private ones in Shanghai. Let it be, delivery drivers or just day-to-day commuters, because Shanghai is really flat
Right,
and it's
right, right.
easier to drive that.
Understood.
It can be dangerous sometimes because there are too many of them.
Got it.
But in Beijing, because the landscape in Beijing is much bigger, much more like spread out. So just compared to Shanghai, I would say the percentage might be lower, and then you might be seeing like more cars. Like the car owner I interviewed for the article for the Can, she was saying she has to get a car just because it's too far away for her for daily commute. So yeah, just to give you a sense of like different cities having different landscapes and car scenes, I guess.
So, China's EV boom has been largely driven by four-wheelers, pun intended. While in India's EV story, three-wheelers have emerged as the unexpected knight in shining armor. But more than where they've gotten, we wanted to know how they got here. With both countries, their governments had a big role to play. More on that in the next segment. So I think we've been hinting at policies through this conversation, little by little, but I kind of want to go back to 2009, right? And where China was in 2009 when the Chinese government started taking EVs so seriously, right? Of course, we all know, we've been reading this in our science textbooks, even here in India. China is the world's biggest carbon emitter, produces about 33% of the world's total as of 2021. So the obvious reason would be that, but is there more at play there? Tell us a little bit about how the conversation around EV adoption and EVs in general, EV manufacturing, how that started in China.
Right. I would say EVs have been around in China maybe since the 90s, but you're right. It's not until 2009 that the central government just decided to really push for it. I think becoming greener and having a better image in the world stage is definitely a big, big motivation behind it. And it's just a good look for the president as well, President Xi. And it's also good for the economy because, it's a new thing. It's hype, everyone talking about it. And the government rolled out really nice subsidies for, individual consumers and different friendly policies for people to consider in it. So in the beginning, for subsidies, you can get up to 12,000 RMB, which was nearly 1,800 US dollars, plus tax breaks. And you can see that's pretty nice
Yeah.
for consumers. And then the government also really pushed out like development of technology, infrastructure. Like, even until now, it's giving subsidies to companies like car makers and also like public use, they're also trying to push everything. Everyone is using EV cars. And now if you have like an old car, similar to like what Apple is doing, you can bring your own old car and then to get maybe a price cut when you buy a new EV. And also like other policies that they were designed to encourage buyers. For example, the free license plates we were talking about, it's easier to get a plate than, an ICE a vehicle. And that just encourages many people when they really need to use a car, and that's just an easier option to buy an EV than ICE.
So, like Lou said, from 2009 till 2022, which is many, many years, the Chinese government went all out. It left no stone unturned. And these were not just subsidies for consumers, the people who were buying these EVs, they were also for people manufacturing these EVs. And hence, the explosion of EV companies that we talked about a little while ago.
In many ways, the Indian government's approach and intent was similar. Like China, India also wanted to get its carbon emissions under control, and EVs were a big part of that project. It launched several iterations of its flagship FAME scheme, which stands for Faster Adoption and Manufacturing of EVs. Through the scheme, it has been subsidizing, purchasing, and making of EVs in India. Of course, terms and conditions apply. But the scale was completely different. In fact, it's not even comparable.
Lou was talking about individual subsidies, right? Like
right.
subsidies being focused towards the buyers, consumers.
Right.
But here in India, it's a little bit different, right?
No, we have a mix of both, right? Let's just put it into larger context. So I think there was a study done by the Center of Strategic Studies on China by this guy called Scott Kennedy. He basically calculated the total amount of Chinese EV subsidies, and the figure stands at $231 billion over 15 years.
Wow.
Now, let's put it into context with India, which started in 2015, 529 crore for FAME 1 and 10,000. Take 11,000 crore in FAME 2, even counting the stopgap figures. So, that's...
This is in rupees. We're talking
rupees. So, it just comes up to $1.5 billion.
Okay.
So, we can see the fractional percentage it is compared to, China.
Right.
And at the same time, we have another subsidy known as a PLI subsidy. Now, these focus on the automakers, where they get benefited from a subsidy given by the government and not the end consumer. So how FAME works is basically, again, it's a little convoluted because it's not a direct transfer payment. So if I'm buying a Ola scooter today, I'll buy it at a subsidized cost. Now, Ola has to go to a government agency and get that money.
Right.
And I had covered a story last year which basically said that for months on end, almost 100, 200 crores were waiting in payments for them. And that always hits their supply chain. Obviously, Ola has deeper pockets, so they can weather that storm. But you compare it to the likes of an Ather, which does not have deeper pockets, it affects all of their operations that are captured in that story as well. So it works a little differently in India.
Right. So this is also where the whole FAME controversy happened, right? Where EV companies in India, they were getting parts from other countries, and then they were, taking advantage of all these subsidies that the government had come up with, which were meant for companies that were manufacturing in India.
What's interesting is the role of this institution known as IFCI. So IFCI was basically brought in when EV companies were violating the localization norms. So to avail the FAME subsidy, you had to prove that, 50% of my supply chain is localized. Now, EV companies, the likes of Hero, Okinawa, there were a few others as well, they were caught with their hand in the cookie jar. You guys violated this and now you have to pay a fine to this tune or just return the subsidy. Then at the same hand, the Ola and Ather were accused of something else. They were accused of inflating their upfront cost because they were selling chargers separately. So it's a little different. Everyone's accused of misusing the funds, but on different counts.
Right.
So it's a little confusing, but the role of IFCI is interesting.
So like Nathan said, there are government subsidies in place. It's been a couple years and 2 iterations of fame, and people have already figured out how to game the system, particularly when it comes to localization. That's the unfortunate flip side of the global EV boom. Unfortunately, that's also just the tip of the iceberg. We are still in the teething phase of our EV journey, but China has entered its teens. And we all know puberty comes with a whole set of its own problems. In China's case, it is price wars, record breaking insurance premiums, and a threat to data privacy. But it's all worth it in the end if it's good for the environment, right? Well, maybe not. More on that in the next segment.
So, the whole idea of switching to EVs is basically because we are doing it for the environment, right? We feel so good about it. EVs are being sold as the clean option for transport. Like, for example, China, which is one of the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world, if I'm not wrong. So, that it has become the leader of the whole switch to EVs for the rest of the world, that makes sense, right? India too is actually, by the way, right up there after China when it comes to CO2 emissions. So, Nathan, tell us, are EVs actually tangibly helping us towards our goal for a better and more sustainable environment?
The sad answer is it depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
So it depends on also how you calculate it, right? Because if you speak to some think tank that's based out in the USA, they'll talk about tailpipe emissions when it comes to EVs. And they'll be like, okay, EVs are the cleanest option out there. Compare it to someone that's in Japan, which is on the forefront of hybrid production, right? They'll calculate it on a different front known as the cradle to grave index, where they'll also talk about, okay, how is the charger being built? How is the cell being developed?
Right.
All of these processes require coal burning.
Correct.
So if you calculate all of these emissions at a life cycle range, you may come to the conclusion, okay, hybrids may be the better option for this point of time. Until then, we need to put EVs on pause and we'll sell hybrids and buy hybrids for now. So that also is up for debate. The sad answer is it really depends on who you ask.
Yeah. So we were talking about pollution, right? And EVs and their contribution to sustainability and a better environment and all of that, and whether that is how much of that is true. And Nathan was talking about long-term effects and short-term gains, right? So I was asking you about China, because we've all seen those pictures of cities in China, like super polluted, thick smog, all of that, and it's quite familiar to us. It's the same story here in Delhi and other big cities as well. So did EV adoption in China actually help bring down pollution?
That's a great question. I guess there's so many different factors, right? EV is not the only thing that China is doing to try to become greener. It's also taking other steps to becoming that. And it's difficult to say if EV adoption is helping directly. And I guess there's also a debate globally whether EVs are actually green or actually good for the environment. But I guess, like Nathan said, it's just what everyone is doing, and you just have to get on this track. But I would say, in general, pollution has been going less. I mean, the environment has been becoming better in recent years, especially, I guess, after, the Beijing Olympics. And China just wants to maintain that image. So it's trying to do different things to make that happen. And but also in different parts of China, like in north and west parts, they have more industries that just produce more pollution. And also the landscape, like the west part of China, you've got desert. And then in some weathers, it just can become horrendous for other parts of the China as well. You can see, the sky just becomes yellow all of a sudden for days, for weeks even. But yeah, in general, I would say it's going. The government is doing a lot of things that it can, but how close we're getting to its goal, I guess it's still there's still a long way to go.
And
Sure.
while we're on the subject, there is this study that Nature that was published in Nature magazine recently that was actually looking at the impact that EVs and electric mobility in general has had on AQI levels in like big Chinese cities, so Beijing, Shanghai, and they found that there was a decrease in AQI with in cities where there was increased frequency of private EV vehicles, but in Beijing and Shanghai, where power generation is still coal based, the study found that there was an increase in nitrogen dioxide concentrations, right? And that's potentially linked to the sort of electricity consumption that one would associate with EVs. But on the whole, the study did find that there is a notable kind of carbon reduction effect and, like, therefore, a substantial reduction in emissions as well. But coming back to what Nathan said, depends on which study who's doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. It's all biased.
Yeah. So, like, I feel like it's not just think tanks that are privy to this. Like, we can see it, like, in the Indian context, at least, you can see it literally translate into a war of words between the major automakers as well. Just to give you, like, a flavor of that, is that in May, during Tata Motors' earning call, the chief financial officer dismissed hybrids as a tax break tool, which is quite something.
Wow.
Like,
Okay.
he just dismissed it. At the same time, like, I think a few weeks before that, Maruti chairman R.C. Bhargava, he went out to say that hybrids are less polluting than EVs because 76% of like EV generation comes from coal. So like what we're seeing play out, and like Maruti is driving the hybrid sales in India
Right.
with a marriage of convenience with Toyota. So we're seeing it play out even in like the company's point of view. And this will just intensify over time. Like now Maruti obviously will announce its EV plans, but you can see this debate and contention between the companies as well right now.
Yeah. But whether or not it is good for the environment, when it comes to consumers, price is what matters the most, especially here in India. So, when people look for the perfect EV, they're usually not thinking about which model is best for the environment, right? Instead, they're actually thinking about which model gives them the best range, which has the best features, and which has the best price. So, luckily for them, there are plenty of options available in the market. But in China, that comes at a price.
Right, Lou, China's in this very interesting place in its EV journey. You have more than hundreds of brands popping up left, right, and center. Brands are being launched and they're also failing at this breakneck speed. Now, an unfortunate byproduct of all of that is this very aggressive price war that we're seeing, right? We're seeing companies slash costs really significantly almost overnight. That must put consumers in a pretty precarious place, right?
That's totally right. Actually, I think that's giving a lot of consumers just hesitant would they go into EV because not just the price war, or not just like the price, but also different models. Because companies, they're just trying to push out new models, new updates as soon as possible. And that not only adds on to the price war and also makes consumers just concerned, are they actually safe? Are they being tested? And also they wonder if they can buy cheaper ones. So I think that also, makes the growth rate of EV adoption kind of slowing down a little bit, even though the whole market is still like on the hype. There's still so many new stuff coming out, but people will be a little bit hesitant because they're not really sure what to believe and what not.
Lou, you just mentioned concerns about safety when it comes to EVs. We have seen so many accidents happen in China, and even in India, there have been many cases. Like, we've all heard about the stories of EV scooters suddenly bursting into flames. And that brings me to EV insurances, right? And Lou, you did a fantastic story about how EV insurance in China is getting more and more expensive. So, tell us about that. But before we get there, Nathan, can you tell us what is happening with EV insurance in India? Like, we know that the market is not as evolved as China right now, right?
Right. So whenever I spoke to anyone that's working in like the EV financing space, they always just pointed out, okay, the market is nascent, and this has been going on since like mid 2023. Like for the market to grow, you need to have like a resale value of EVs, which we're not really seeing right now. And that's why we're not seeing it take off, as I guess we're seeing a take off in China. But that has to do with the penetration rates as well in India, because like the four-wheeler penetration rates stand at like 2 to 3% right
Yeah.
now. So yeah.
And Lou, do you want to now give us a sense of what's happening in China vis-a-vis like EV insurance?
Right. So actually, EVs, they were using the same standard as ICE cars, as in insurances, for a very long time, up until 2021. And then that's the point we've got specialized EV insurance. I mean, commercial ones. So you've got insurances that would be covering, the batteries or like the parts specifically only to EVs. And since then, the market has just gone up quickly. And now, apart from those, ones you have to buy to get on the road, there are other commercial ones you can just choose to buy or whatnot. But the insurance market is a little bit tricky here in China, that there are so many different products, and the price isn't cheap, honestly. Just based on the conversation, I talked to like insurers and also car owners. Plus the insurance, the total cost might be similar to purchase an ICE car. And that's also making people like, questioning if that's actually worthwhile to buy a car. Because when it comes down to consumers, they concern more about the cost than environment, let's be honest. And then when we talk to insurers, even though the insurance is higher, but they're still losing money because it's so costly to cover a EV car. They're more likely to get into a car accident, and then when they do, the cost to change, to fix any parts of an EV, it just costs more money than doing a traditional cars.
Right, but all things considered, China is still light years ahead of everyone else, right? So even if the market is slowing down there, no one is even close to where China is right now. So what I want to understand is what the main factors are that have actually gotten China to where it is now with EVs.
Right. I feel like the central government has definitely done a lot. And in China, I think the power of a central government, it's just uncomparable to many other countries. When the central government sets its mind to something, it also goes down to like local governments, neighborhoods, communities, goes down to individuals. And they've got to go. They've got a task to do. That's just their job. If they don't do it, they might lose their job. They might, face other things. So they really set their minds to it. And also because there's also a race between different like tech companies or car owners. There's so many different companies that they're trying to get on top of each other. And that race, I guess, also push companies to do like different models, advancements, technologies, and even like Xiaomi, right? Because it's already got so far in the smartphone market. It's also like overseas everywhere, right? So now it's trying to see, oh, where else can we go? And EV market is like the next for them. It's difficult to say if they can actually go far in the EV market because it's also like very competitive. But basically that's like the whole environment in China. It's just very competitive and everyone's going really fast.
Daybreak is produced from the newsroom of the Ken, India's first subscriber-focused business news platform. What you're listening to is just a small sample of our subscriber-only offerings.
A full subscription unlocks daily long-form feature stories, newsletters, and podcast extras. Head to theken.com and click on the red subscribe button on the top of the Ken website.
Today's episode was hosted and produced by Rahel Philippos and I, Snigdha Sharma, and it was edited by Rajiv Sien. Also, a huge shout out to Aditi and Kavipriya and the rest of our fantastic design team here at the Ken for the amazing artwork that they make for every Friday special episode of Daybreak.